Alrighty, everyone. Good evening. This is meteorologist Timmy Albertson here with you guys for tonight's weather chat. Here we got ourselves kind of a quick show. After all, it is a Friday evening. I'm sure a lot of you guys probably got some plans that you might want to get to here. But of course, for those of you who are like me and love to talk about the weather, well, that's why you're here anyway. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the weather. Hey, we had ourselves a tornado last night during the weather chat. Go figure. I was right when our internet happened to conk out for the few minutes. But in that few minutes, we had ourselves a little tornado that did actually develop. So we're going to take a little bit of a look about that. That tornado actually has been confirmed now from the weather office over in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They confirmed it earlier on this afternoon. So, of course, we'll talk a little bit about that. For those of you who might be new to this show, as it is still relatively new, or how we do things here is I'll talk a little bit about the weather. And if you got any questions or anything you'd like to ask, you can always feel free to ask those questions. I'll be more than happy to answer those for you. And if there's something that you want to take a look at weather-wise, we can always do that too. But again, as mentioned, it is Friday evening after all. So let's get right down to it, shall we? All right. Let's talk about that tornado that they had last night out in Grand Rapids. So we were looking last night at a storm that was just, again, on the north side of the Grand Rapids area. And interestingly, what we were kind of focusing in on was an area of some gusty winds that you see there on the bottom left of your screen. So you're looking at two different radar images. So let me go ahead and explain this really quickly. And then, of course, I'll kind of walk you through a little bit as to what we were observing. So on the right is what is known as a velocity radar image. What in the world is that? Well, the velocity radar image is used to kind of see winds within a thunderstorm, and it also helps us to look for rotation. In fact, it's probably one of the most important features we have in radars is the velocity. And basically what you see here is that green colors in this particular case are, well, and actually in most cases, the way they're colored, green are winds going towards the radar, red colors are winds going away from the radar. So again, we happen to see reds and greens right up against each other. Well, that sometimes is a very good indication that there may be some rotation within that storm. So what we were looking at last evening was just to the north over in Michigan. And we were watching the bottom left there, you see some very bright green colors. Well, that was actually some gusty winds that were kind of pushing their way through within that storm there, and probably around 50 to 60-mile-an-hour winds. Now, that might have actually allowed for the storm or those winds might have actually allowed for a little bit of a, how would you say it here? Those winds might have, wait, let me think of how to word this here, all right, without getting too scientific. Basically, those winds might have helped to kind of add to some low-level wind shear that we had along that storm line. And so that kind of allowed a little bit of surface wind shear to kind of help produce a little bit of a spin-up tornado. I know, that's probably not the best explanation, but without getting too scientific, that's probably the best explanation I can most likely give with that kind of setup. So long story short, we were watching some pretty gusty winds with that storm. If you look just above that green blob, you'll notice this little spot of red. Well, that little spot of red was some wind going in the other direction. As I mentioned, it was probably a little bit of some low-level wind shear that was going on, and that kind of eventually led to producing what you see there on the right of your screen. That's called a correlation coefficient radar imagery. And for those of you who are familiar with statistics, correlation coefficient is, the correlation of, things being similar. When we see a high coefficient, means that, there's, a lot of similarities with it here, and naturally, good confidence in something. Now, when you have a lower coefficient, it means that things are a little bit different, and there might not be so much of a correlation with everything. So on the right, we have something called a correlation coefficient radar type imagery. And what that does is, because of the way the radars now measure things with field pole, they can kind of detect the average size of objects. Now, in this case, it's normally just detecting rain. And raindrops, even though they do vary a little bit, tend to generally be about the same size. So because of that, they tend to have a high correlation coefficient value. But when you start picking up debris, well, things get a little bit different. And the reason for that is because, well, debris can be a bunch of different sizes. You can have leaves, so you can have sticks, dirt, and then, of course, in the stronger tornadoes, you could have yourselves, actual like house, roofs and stuff like that. So the correlation will begin to everything is around the same size. So that's often what we use in weather as a very good indication for seeing debris. And you're going to see that here when we take a look at some of these radar scans. So again, this was around 8:15 last evening. We were watching that kind of wind burst right up around the north side of the Walker area. That likely added to enough little low-level shear that it began to kind of produce a little bit of a trail just up towards the north. Here's the next radar scan. Check this out, folks. This is actually really kind of cool to see. And basically, more or less kind of what you're seeing is that the returns are becoming a lot more defined. You're seeing a lot of those bright reds, within kind of that swath of green there. So that's likely the tornado on the ground at that. You see a little blue dot kind of in the middle part of that section of the screen. That's actually debris being picked up by that tornado, by that tornado, and that debris, is being registered there on the radar imagery. So we call that a debris signature. Again, another, typically when you see that, it likely is a tornado because where else, generally would that debris be coming from? So this is one thing that we really do look for a lot of when we talk about, when we're looking at tornadoes on a radar imagery. That tends to be one of the, things that, when we actually see that, it's a good indication that there may actually be a tornado on the ground. So, of course, in this case, we later found out that yes, there was a tornado that was on the ground. And not only that, but it kind of continued. So again, we're getting those radar scans, and you can start to see it kind of becoming more defined there. If we flip over the next radar imagery, you can really see how those red and green, that kind of clump there right around the center part of your screen is got, is still pretty defined, albeit not necessarily, indicative of a very strong tornado. If we were talking strong tornado, we would typically expect to be seeing those values much more extreme. But regardless of the fact, it's still a good indication that there probably was something on the ground. And again, you can see the debris signature there on your right. And then this tornado did not last very long. It was only on the ground for about 8 miles. And finally, we see here with the last radar scan, some of the debris maybe still kind of hanging, but nothing too unusual. Not unusual, but something to kind of be expected. That tornado probably weakened off, and some of that stuff was still kind of flying around before it eventually fell back down. Now, when we're talking about big tornadoes and everything, typically we would see these examples way, way, way more pronounced. But we were also looking pretty close to the radar site. This once again, this happened very close to the radar site. So even though it was somewhat of a weaker tornado, it still showed up pretty nicely there on the radar imagery. And the National Weather Service ended up actually rating this tornado as an EF1, a high-end EF1. So for those of you who are familiar with the way the scale works, EF0 is the lowest, and then EF5 is the highest, and it uses damage to estimate the wind speeds of a tornado. So again, tornadoes are kind of weird in that they're rated based on the damage, and they use the damage to determine the winds. So it's kind of strange. It's not like a hurricane, which is based solely on the wind speed. If a tornado happens in the middle of nowhere and there's no damage, well, we can't really give it a rating, so thus it would get a, actually sometimes it wouldn't even get a rating at that point. So Weather Service was out there today. They did some survey, found some minor structural damage in a few places, but again, this was a EF1 with winds of about 110 miles an hour, so that puts it at the high-end EF rating, just 1 mile per hour shy of being an EF2, but it was on the ground for about 8.5 miles. In about 15 minutes, it covered that distance there. So maybe a little bit more than what we would consider a spin-up tornado, but still one there nonetheless. And that was all part of a storm line that was in the process of developing across central Michigan and eventually made its way through a good portion of the state of Michigan. So rather interesting there, rather interesting I guess I should put it for you that way. All righty, everyone. With that in mind, you're probably wondering about the tropics here a little bit, so we'll go ahead and take a quick little look over at the tropics. We still have Tropical Storm Franklin out there. Unfortunately, Franklin still is just really kind of having a difficult time with things. It's still getting hit pretty hard with the wind shear, which is why it looks nothing. It looks, like a blob there on on the satellite imagery just below my face. Again, you can see not kind of that classic structure that we'd be looking for, particularly. But it is expected that eventually, as we go through the next couple of days, it might have a little bit more better of an atmosphere. It'll probably begin to gradually re-intensify, get better organized, and it is likely going to become a hurricane as we go maybe into the end of the weekend and starting off next work week. With that in mind, that is not the only thing that we're watching here. So I'm going to flip off, we're going to flip to another image here. This is a satellite imagery for you guys. And I want you to pay attention that, what you see, all those little clouds there north of the Greater Antilles on the satellite imagery, that is Tropical Storm Franklin. But if you look down towards south of Florida, over towards the Yucatan Peninsula, you'll notice kind of another grouping of clouds. That's another disturbance that the Hurricane Center is watching, and it is starting to look like it may likely become another tropical system, maybe over the next few days or whatnot. So that might also be something to watch, because the track of that, with the way things appear at the upper levels and everything, would bring that kind of maybe into the Gulf Coast area. So with that in mind, just kind of something that will have to be watched a little bit over the next few days. But again, right now it's kind of a little bit of a tropical wave. Doesn't have a name or anything like that. It needs to become a tropical storm in order to get its name. And when that happens, then of course, we'll know a little bit more about it. But it's not even a tropical depression at the moment, so it's just kind of a more or less eventually form into our next tropical system. So that's kind of a latest with the tropics right now. So overall, kind of a somewhat kind of quiet-ish weather day, depending upon where you are. But that might not necessarily be the case in some other places, as we are seeing some showers and thunderstorms. Now, we are expecting the possibility of showers and thunderstorms across the Ohio River Valley. As we go into the evening hours, that might become a little bit more of a factor, especially out around Illinois. But right now, kind of the main activity that is occurring is all the way over in Kentucky. Yeah, all the way over in Kentucky. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick little look over there while I still have you guys' attention. We're going to take a look over here at the radar imagery. Again, you got your velocities on the right, and you got your reflectivity, the general type of radar that you see on the left. We'll go ahead and take the velocities off. Now we're looking in Kentucky here. There's Louisville right up where my cursor is, and then of course there is Frankfort, kind of blocked a little bit there by that. There's Lexington, Kentucky right over there. Again, this storm line is kind of pushing its way down to the south, kind of very similar to what we saw with that Ohio storm line the other day. So again, something that has at times produced some barely severe kind of criteria in the form of some gusty winds around 55, 60 miles an hour. But really, that's pretty much about it. I don't really think there have been much in the way of hail reports with these storms, but it is certainly something that might still be a little bit of a possibility. Obviously, this is not likely going to be expected to be too much, as we see the outflow boundary of that has kind of run out ahead of the main storm line, and we'll probably begin to weaken it as we head our way over the next, probably into the evening hours, especially once the sun begins to set. Main area of focus tonight will be out around Illinois, where it's likely we're probably going to see some more storms trying to fire up as we head our way into the overnight hours and into the evening. Otherwise, again, maybe not quite as much activity tonight as what we saw yesterday over in Michigan and parts of northeastern Ohio. And again, taking a look over the Davenport area, we see that things are a little bit on the quiet side for right now. There happens to be a little bit of an inversion that's kind of making it tricky for some of these storms to fire up. We'll keep an eye on this little guy around Lewiston, maybe around the Peoria area. We'll see what maybe kind of tries developing there over the next couple of hours. But really, this is also looking like it'll probably just kind of mainly be a localized wind event with some of these stronger storms. Doesn't appear as though this is likely not going to be a severe weather outbreak by any means. Just kind of, more or less one of those lines of storms, maybe some pockets of gusty winds here and there. So again, could be a little bit of a loud night across parts of Illinois and going back into Indiana, but overall, again, that's pretty much about it right now with the weather. If we flip back over, you've been talking about the heat wave the past couple of days. And actually, if we were to go ahead and take a look at the upper level chart, you could see that upper level high has really kind of weakened up a little bit there. It's still pronounced, but it's not quite as much as it was. And that will eventually maybe kind of begin to drift its way more off towards the east. So, with that in mind, folks, that is a look at kind of what is going on with the weather at this time. As mentioned, kind of a quiet evening. And given the fact that it is, after all, Friday, I'm sure some of you guys probably want to get back to doing your Friday evening type of things there. So we'll keep an eye on this activity. But again, it's going to be kind of a quiet night, so not much to talk about. But we will be back tomorrow, too, as we go into your day Saturday. Hey, football season. There's going to be some football games tomorrow. We'll take a look at the weather that could be around those areas. We'll see what active weather might be going on and if that could affect any of those football games. And we're also going to naturally keep an eye on the tropics. I'll let you guys know if there's anything new with that disturbance out around the Yucatan Peninsula and whether or not Franklin's going to have a little bit easier of a time, which it may or may not. But eventually, it probably will have a little bit better luck, especially as we go into next week. And naturally, well, we'll talk about all that and much more. So with that in mind, everyone, I thank you all for taking the time to join me here on this really quick weather chat here. Only about, wow, this is probably one of our shortest ones. We've gone about 20 minutes at most. But again, kind of a quieter evening out there. Just wanted to catch you all up to date with that tornado and, show you some of the storms. Maybe if things kind of get a little interesting with these storms in Illinois later on, we'll maybe take a look at that later this evening. But for right now, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I thank you all very much for taking the time to join me here. I look forward to seeing you guys back here tomorrow. We'll take a look at some more weather then. Until then, well, keep enjoying the weather.